Ultimately, for me, when I think about popular culture, I think about what our social norms are. What are the ideas, the concepts, and the beliefs that a majority of people in our society have accepted as a norm, that they've accepted. It doesn't cause them cognitive dissonance. It doesn't cause them to, push back. It doesn't cause them to feel, othered or disadvantaged by these concepts. And it's just normal. And all throughout history, as we look back, we can see where some things were once taboo that are now normalized today. So ultimately, we are trying to normalize the various elements of my theory of indivisibility so that more people can feel included in our society and more people can feel like they belong in our society, and that we can continue to do our part towards ending oppression of all types.
The Grow Dialogue podcast is a liberation project that explores equity, inclusion, belonging, conflict resolution, and culture in the workplace and beyond, including in our personal relationships, families, and communities. Each week, Dr. Sundiata Soon-Jahta and I will bring you insightful guest interviews and artistic expressions curated to amplify emerging voices who are sharing practices that support society's transition to a more collaborative, just, sustainable, and liberating coexistence. We live during a time when divisiveness and polarization dominate the social, economic, and political discourse. In response to this reality and empowered with the skills of authentic dialogue and systems thinking, Dr. Sundiata Soon-Jahta created an anti-oppression framework for social sustainability called Theory of Indivisibility to help illuminate a different path forward. Our hope is that these conversations and calls to action will ignite tolerance and empathy and provide guidance for our global listeners who want to actively engage in ending all forms of oppression while creating thriving relationships in the workplace and beyond. I'm Maryella Marie. Let's grow dialogue.
All right, so we are live, and I'm really excited to roll into our second theme for this podcast. We've been interviewing, well, I should say you've been interviewing some beautiful minds, as it relates to corporate culture, and now we're gonna pivot into popular culture. But I just want to help set the stage for our listeners, because I know that, popular culture is such a big concept, reality. So I want to set the stage with how we can define it together, as Grow Dialogue, so that our listeners can, be on the same boat. So again, let's set the stage by defining what popular culture means according to a few authors who have written extensively on the subject. And then we'll briefly reflect on popular culture's impact on our society. For example, how we express ourselves or how we communicate with others, how we consider or what we consider to be socially acceptable, moral, radical, all that jazz. But again, let's set the stage first. So Soon-Jahta, I'm gonna read 3 interpretations of what popular culture is as interpreted by a few authors on Science Direct. That includes various journals and books.
Okay.
So yes, here we go. After I read each one, I'll hold space so that we can see which you resonate with and help our listeners understand what we're gonna specifically be diving into on the podcast. So this first one is, popular culture involves a gamut of objects, practices, meanings, and cultural contexts, usually produced and consumed by mass audiences around the world. To speak of distinctly local or national popular cultures seems ever more challenging in a globally interconnected world. Popular culture is creatively diverse, geographically dispersed, commercially varied, and politically multifaceted in nature. It cannot be divorced from indices of social and economic differences. So this comes from the International Encyclopedia of Human Geography. Please bear with us. These are very, chewy words, as we've got, some authors that are diving in deep on the subject. But Soon-Jahta, what resonates with you the most as it relates to what we'll be diving into for our pop culture theme on the podcast?
Well, what resonates to me the most, Maryella, is the idea that popular culture involves a gamut, like that word gamut, which means to me like a wide variety of objects, practices, meanings, and cultural contexts. Because, for the most part, when I generally think of popular culture, I think about like celebrities and pop music and like pop culture news, which tends to be about, music, movie, art, and the arts. So I appreciate that this particular explanation brings in the idea that it's a range of things beyond just, popular people and famous folks, and goes into the variety of objects, practices, meanings, and cultural contexts. So that's what stands out to me about that first definition.
All right, cool. All right, moving on to this second definition here. I'm going to read this again, and Soon-Jahta, I'd love to hear you reflect on it. So this one reads, popular culture is ubiquitous. It shapes and is shaped by our everyday lives. Despite the pervasiveness of popular culture in the lives of youth, its relationship to school curriculum remains contested. In this book, two strands of recent studies are reviewed: research that considers popular culture as curriculum, and research that examines the relationship between popular culture and curriculum. It is suggested that scholars locate future research on popular culture and curriculum at the intersections of youth practices, pedagogy, and media. And this comes from the International Encyclopedia of Education. So Soon-Jahta, what resonates with you the most here with this interpretation as it relates to what we'll be diving into on the podcast here with pop culture?
So what's interesting about this definition is that, it's for a Encyclopedia of Education. So obviously it brings in, pedagogy and, working with young people and how it impacts youth. For me though, what truly stands out is the first sentence. Popular culture is ubiquitous, it's shaped and is shaped by our everyday lives. I think that's a very, very important statement because it gives, us as humans agency, us as individual humans agency, so that we don't have to think of popular culture as something that's only happening to us, but it's also something that we have an impact on as well. And that speaks directly to the power of what I think we are doing with this podcast. We're not saying we're just going to accept things for the way they are. We're saying we want to elevate certain voices that's putting out a specific message around equity, inclusion, belonging, anti-oppression, authentic dialogue, etc. So I really, that's what I would pull out from that particular definition.
I love it. So far, popular culture is a gamut of objects. It involves a gamut of objects. And also popular culture is ubiquitous. So I love just how open it is, because it helps for a collaborative exploration to happen, essentially. And it's not just, like you said, like these figures that we have in media are determining things for us because they are so, popular as it relates to what we are consuming. So thank you for breaking that down. All right. So we got the third one here. And this one reads, popular culture comes into existence as a contrast with the then normatively superior high culture associated with the aristocracy and bourgeoisie. Conversely, various social actors have increasingly developed the idea of popular culture as a means of affiliating themselves with the masses, illustrating their disdain for cultural elitism. Popular culture is synonymous with Western material culture, leading to the subsequent objectification of authentic local cultures. And this comes from the International Encyclopedia of Human Geography. So Soon-Jahta, what resonates with you on this last interpretation here as it relates to how we are going to dive into popular culture on the podcast?
Well, what's interesting about this last definition is that it brings in like the origins of the idea of popular culture as something that stood in contrast to, cultural elitism, what the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie did and what their cultural norms were. And then there was like the culture of the masses. And over time, because, the way I'm seeing like the evolution of this, it evolved into what we understand it to be today. So I appreciate what that gave there. And it also talked about, how it then goes on to talk about how Western culture is kind of, because of globalization, it's kind of dominating and it tends to erase authentic local cultures. So something that stands out to me with that is I feel like, a part of what we're doing is we're amplifying voices through this podcast that tend to be erased or excluded from pop culture as we currently know it. So again, I think that as we move into, or I know that, what we're going to do with the people that we're going to interview is we're bringing, we're basically shining a spotlight on, people and, concepts and realities that aren't necessarily a part of the cultural norm right now, but we're hoping through our work and the work of others that these, our society and our cultural norms or our popular culture, the lens will widen for what that means, and we'll have more inclusion in terms of what that means, so more people and stories are understood and accepted.
Yes, and this is a great moment to reflect on our previous theme. I just love how you were asking, is there a story that you can bring to mind that has affected or impacted your life or your work? And I'm excited to hear you bring that question into this theme as well. And we'll see, the similarities, the differences, and as you said, just, the emerging voices in this space that are, that we want to bring a spotlight to and to support elevating their perspectives. So as you mentioned before, and as our listeners know, we'll be bringing on 3 voices who are shaping pop culture narratives. And we'll be asking folks, who are really interested in speaking to identity, things like gender norms, sex education, food sovereignty as activism. These are just to name a few themes that the guest speakers that we're bringing on will speak to. So because we often bring your theory of indivisibility to the center of these conversations, I'd love for you to tell our listeners how you'd like to explore your theory of indivisibility within this popular culture theme as you interview our next 3 guest speakers.
Absolutely. And for those who have been following, and I've already actually mentioned some of the words that are included in my tools of indivisibility, which are a part of my theory of indivisibility, is that, we say that this podcast is a liberation project. And we talk about amplifying equity, inclusion, not just in the workplace, but also in communities and families and in individual personal relationships. And that's what my theory of indivisibility is all about. We're talking about emphasizing and amplifying tolerance, empathy, inclusion, pluralism, the idea that, there can be a safe place for varying beliefs, and that our beliefs don't have to compete. The idea of collaboration and sharing and, agency and consent, and all these various elements will be very much so a part of the conversations that we will be having, and those things will be teased out, and there'll be underlying themes. Even if we don't name those things specifically, those are the underlying themes and the elements that will emerge, in these conversations. And that's what this project is all about. That's what this podcast is all about. And I'm really excited for our listeners to meet these guests and to hear how they are moving in the world in a way where they're amplifying the elements that I just spoke of. Because ultimately, for me, when I think about popular culture, I think about what our social norms are. What are the ideas, the concepts, and the beliefs that a majority of people in our society have accepted as a norm, that they've accepted. It doesn't cause them cognitive dissonance. It doesn't cause them to, push back. It doesn't cause them to feel, othered or disadvantaged by these concepts. And it's just normal. And all throughout history, as we look back, we can see where some things were once taboo that are now normalized today. So ultimately, we are trying to normalize the various elements of my theory of indivisibility so that more people can feel included in our society and more people can feel like they belong in our society, and that we can continue to do our part towards ending oppression of all types and all kinds.
Amazing. Yes, I'm also looking forward to hearing these interviews. I have the pleasure of, being in the studio and producing and editing and adding the music and, highlighting, the specific quotes that you all are speaking to just, put on social media and things like that. So I'm really interested in seeing what our next 3 guests have to share. And also I'm really interested in having our listeners join our community so that we can hear how they are defining or redefining popular culture, or how it's, they're able to see it in their lives. As you're saying, this is a collaborative effort, and to be able to co-create and just, I just have this image of having clay in our hands, and we are shaping and, reimagining what it is so that we can feel included and use these tools of indivisibility to make it what we want it to be, to have this be an experience that is serving us and that is safe for everyone. So Soon-Jahta, I love seeing people write about how your theory of indivisibility is taking shape in their lives. And, through these stories and voices that we're bringing on the podcast. So everyone who's listening, hold on to your seats, buckle up. Join the conversation, join our community, add your comments, let us know what you like, let us know what you want to hear more of. We really want to help. Speaking of collaborating together, we want this to be a collaborative effort. So we want to hear from you as we are, going into this next theme of popular culture and our final theme, which is family culture, that is coming after this. So thank you for joining us on this ride. Soon-Jahta, anything else you'd like to say before we close out?
As always, Maryella, it's a pleasure being here with you. I appreciate all the energy and the excellence that you bring to this production. I hope that our listeners are enjoying it, and I can't wait till we get to do it again. I love y'all. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Grow Dialogue podcast. Remember to join our Grow Dialogue community to continue the conversation, activate authentic dialogue, and to get exclusive content, discounts, and special offers on curated artwork and music from independent artists from the Americas. Check out our show notes for more info and visit www.growdialogue.com to join our live events. Don't forget to support us on Patreon. We really appreciate your support.